Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this latest narration of the web series Forgotten Dungeon. If you're new to the series, there is a playlist listed down below in the description. And as always, I hope that you enjoy. Chapter 78. Uno Avatar. I was currently busy, glaring at the group of trembling butchers. They were curled up in a strange bowing position, but I didn't hold it against them. It was the only one allowed by their complicated physique. The pose consisted of a lowered upper, fleshy body with the head stuck to the floor and the mechanical part spread out vertically, kinda like a Japanese dogeza with spread-out cheeks, but not really. Usually I would laugh it off, but these dancers left my avatar naked and trembling for a whole night, too busy with celebrations of my descent to give a crap. All the while, the said incarnation was still chained to the operating table. It would be stuff straight out of nightmares, if not for my ability to leave it at a moment's notice. Which was not an excuse for such negligence to go unpunished. I was considering various solutions to the problem, but these thoughts flew out the window as soon as they offered to kill themselves in repentance while murmuring something about their lives being the least that they could offer to appease my anger. The last thing I wanted to see in my dungeon was a ritual suicide, especially a religious one. They were icky in my earlier world, and out here I was afraid that it would actually work. So instead, I asked them to help out the monsters taking care of the invalids as a kind of public service in order to absolve their sins. They took to the order with glee. Most of the veterans had already been distributed between beds, fed, and tucked in record time. Some had to be restrained, but unlike during their earlier experiments, this time the butchers decided to use leather straps, not metal chains. After all, these were not inhuman warriors we met before, but rather common men and women in the second or third levels of their classes, sometimes not even that. They turned out a bit more healthy, intelligent, strong, or agile, depending on their class, but it was nothing that my enhanced servants couldn't handle. After a period of acclimation, Charles's troops were shocked, mostly about not being immediately slaughtered, but also how there was an abundance of freely given food and water, how their needs were taken care of without a question. I spotted a one-handed man devouring a vegetable sandwich while crying. The others held firm, but the wetness in their eyes was easy to notice. How were they treated before if such simple kindness was enough to earn their trust? Their gaunt bodies didn't leave much to the imagination. I switched to my point of view and temporarily abandoned the avatar, leaving it sitting in a comfortable chair. Then my mind focused on accompanying the nearby group of butchers, going from one bed to another. They spoke in a language of hisses and clicks, but nowadays understanding it was just as easy as reading English. Ginson of Kitchen, second-level warrior, the smallest butcher intoned, and the man in question smiled, hearing his name spoken, even if the rest of the words must have sounded like gibberish. Extensive damage to the left leg, shredded muscles and ligaments, corroded lungs, and partial brain damage. All because of a wayward acid abomination. It's his miracle that the patient is still alive. No known family in the Oasis, grown son and daughter in the Shield Star. The ranks, commoners, inconsequential. I see. The largest one growled, eyeing the man. Jin giggled and tried to touch the butcher's appendages, his long brown hair flowing unruly with each movement. A miracle. Yes, that it is. With a sigh, the monster jerked his limb away and continued speaking. Prescribe A1 with a 30% saturation for the leg, and then B1 with a 15% saturation, and a D1 with 60% saturation for the brain. The second butcher, trailing behind the large one, wrote the proportions on a small notepad. I wondered when my creatures acquired paper, or even the technology to make it, not to mention the written word. But in the end, I didn't care. My observations continued. It was important to see how the humans were treated out of my sight. Trust, but verify. Shouldn't we up the dosages? I feel like a bigger concentration would be needed to restore that. The butcher pointed to the wide-eyed veteran, sucking his thumb. Our sacred mission is to return them to workable condition, not to wildly experiment. Is it, though? The Creator wants us to classify and organize the effectiveness and overall risk of the sacred compound. Having the best well-being of these creatures in mind is not part of that goal. I disagree. Our Holy Creator sees them as allies. There's also a deeper political intent behind it. Why else would he work so hard to harness one of their bodies himself? Why not use our sublime form or one of the other creations? We were made in his image, in his perfection.
I concur, the monster's companion bowed its head. There's his truth in your words. We need to be careful.
Let's continue then, brother, for his glorious work. For his glorious work, the two assistants repeated, moving to the second bed. Its occupant was restrained, spewing curses and blood from a bitten tongue.
Duna, no surname, third-level berserker.
The butcher motioned to the dark-haired human.
Suspected brain damage or even malicious curse. It also may be just the effect of his class. He lapses between hyper-aggression phase and complete utter silence. No known family.
Prescribed D1 10% and E1 30%. The monster hummed for a moment. If the treatment works and makes the creature controllable, a bright F1 with 90% saturation.
Is this wise to use the enhancement serum? The subject seems unstable.
I see the intriguing potential within this made human. Seeing my butchers happily continuing their job, I turned most of my attention back to the avatar. Their reactions reminded me of how military hospitals worked, and how the doctors would walk between the wounded, talking in their lingo, or at least that was how it was described in movies. My own experience with hospitals was much more sedate. Anyway, new humans were in good hands. Claws. It was a small jolt as I slipped into the stolen body and started to make my way to the second floor. Going upwards was a curious experience, as was having arms and a mouth. And legs. I couldn't forget about the legs. This exquisite pain of walking and feeling the protest of your body. Even the inconveniences was something I longed for. I was humming and walking in the direction of the underwater lake, located in the western part of the floor. It was the same place where the Rattlings made their moving platform, or whatever else they wanted to call it. It led to the snake dungeon they conquered some time in the past, and served as an important resource highway from and into my place. The second dungeon was supposedly completely under Rattling's control and, more importantly, had a large amount of food for me to try out. It had something to do with the lack of mana needed to supply them with energy, instead creating a large need for edibles. That, in turn, forced them to use local specialties and resources. That's to say, snakes. I heard they kind of taste like chicken, but hell, even snake sashimi or burger or whatever else they had made would be a blessing at this point. The salads created from the unappetizing dungeon plants were awful, and this was only my first day eating them. And yes, I noticed that my avatar's body could eat and drink, but didn't strictly need to. My current theory was that, just like my creations, it could piggyback off the local mana when in my territory, but had to eat, drink, and piss while outside. There was also a pressing need for a mask of some kind, and I had to evacuate my avatar from the premises. After all, Peter was supposed to be dead, and it just wouldn't do to show Charles the extent of my abilities. At least, not yet. I wasn't sure how much knowledge humanity had retained about the position of magic, or, more likely, body snatcher magic in the circumstances. But considering what was currently happening to his girlfriend, Agnes, I doubted that his reaction would be positive. Thus, the journey to the nearby dungeon. That and a little bit of curiosity. What had my creatures done with the place without my supervision? How did the dungeon core feel and look? Was my theory about being the only coherent crystal on the planet correct? So many questions. I couldn't wait. Kiln, son of Karth. Kiln had learned early that life was suffering. Even his ma tried to disagree. Even if Da preached going with the flow, keeping his head low, living the moment. Kiln learned that life was unfair. For the weak, that is, for the poor. Their farming family didn't have enough money to buy even the most basic medicines. Ma died because of the flu, or something similar. It could be a magical disease, for all he knew, but there was no doctor or cleric available to confirm that. Not long after that, Da joined him. His heart simply stopped working one day, putting an end to his silent despair. That left the eldest, 3 younger sons, and their sister. For the precarious moment, they lived together, worked together, to keep Da's legacy alive. And then Kiln learned what betrayal was, and how blood was akin to water for some. The eldest offered their sister to a local noble, and his younger brothers were sold away. not into slavery, as that was forbidden in the kingdom, but as indentured servants, a menial laborer, a shopkeeper, and a soldier. The rest was a blur. Pitched battles, desperate fights for survival, countless comrades, all of them common people, appearing and disappearing when their unit was butchered again and again. A disposable meat shield against the horrors of the undeath and the cruel monsters stalking the night. And amongst the carnage, his class, stalwart defender, grew slowly with each saved life and each death witnessed. In the end, Kiln took command of his battered comrades by virtue of being the oldest one alive. Then, in the heat of retreat, a decision was forced upon him: his life or the life of his charges. Kiln learned of sacrifice that day, and by a cruel twist of fate, he survived, crippled with both his legs cut just below the knees, a useless man saved by chance. Some would call it a miracle, how the attacking monsters cauterized the stumps with its fiery bite, instead of taking his life. For Kiln, it was the beginning of a new type of suffering: the uselessness, the pity, the failing body, the hunger. Kiln received the order to go into the dungeon with relief, not fear, like most of his peers. He was allowed to die before he broke. It was an honorable thing to be consumed in order for others to live. At least, that was what his class whispered in his ear. Instead, they were given water and food by the monsters. Kiln's common sense screamed at him even as he devoured the unpoisoned bread and vegetables. And then the healers came, which meant that even those who were gone the most felt hope, with a big dose of fear. By the end, Kiln was wiggling his new feet while glancing at the surrounding creatures. They weren't so scary anymore. "It's not like I'm not grateful, but I really am," Kiln chortled, staring at the floor. He knew that he had to be concise and loud in order to be understood. "But couldn't you make my legs a bit more normal? And less like this." He pointed towards the scale-covered feet, looking more like something that a lizard would sport, with digits ending in brutal-looking claws. The largest of the surrounding monsters smiled. Its teeth were terrifying, and answered his question. "It was his will that you survived the operation. It is not our way to question his miracles. It is not yours either." The monster rumbled, the sounds barely understandable. "I see," Kiln mumbled. "Can't do anything then." "Wait, what about my class?" With a small prayer, the muscular man summoned a simple blue window. It looked different than normal. Name, Kiln, son of Karth. Race, impure human/Drake. Class, Drakish Defender. Level 3. Kiln drawled. "I think that's not good." The monsters around him howled in delight. Uno, Avatar. Currently my spare body is in great distress. I forgot what waited under the cloudy waters of the underground lake. I forgot about the glass progenitor. The Theka was lying in ambush and attacked as soon as I appeared nearby, spearing the surrounding walls with its countless appendages. The always hungry monster wasn't under my direct control, and since I looked like its preferred meal, a human, the aggressive plant attacked with a flurry of blows. I dodged and weaved around the monster, feeling the ligaments and muscles scream under the pressure. Better wounded than dead, though, even if it would not be a final death. Yet the attacks kept coming, and soon I was forced to tank one or two, flying through the air like a stringless puppet. It wasn't all bad. The fear of death quickened my ability to learn my host's magic. The earth blocking my adversary for 30 or so seconds before beating continued. I still couldn't get a bead on my shadow affinity, even with the death waiting behind the corner. I was nearly forced to call for help when the glass progenitor suddenly screamed in distress. It was something else to experience that change. From a hungry predator to the pure terror of a well-flogged slave that the monster radiated when well-placed dagger nailed its tentacle to a wall. How the world around us stood still when non-slender figure appeared from a nearby wall, and how fast the hungry beastie slithered away from my revenant. "Thanks," I smiled happily, despite the countless wounds. Even pain was a novel sensation after all this time. "That was fun." She tilted her head questioningly. "Oh, no, that's me." "Now thanks for the save, but I need to move. Can't risk showing Choles this body." "Plan. Yep, I got it all under my skull." I tapped my head with a grin. There was no hollow sound. Too bad. "Question," she breathed out loudly. Talk. Sure, but I need to ask you something too. Seeing her nod, I continued. Is it me, or is your speech pattern getting worse? Are words harder for you to speak out, or is it something else? Lon stared at me for a long while before sighing. Worse. Dead. Longer. Oh, I squinted. It was hard to tell. She was always so damn stone-faced. Kudere, they called it. I never managed to remember the correct otaku terms. Or was the word limited to love interests? Does that mean that you're ready for my proposition? Ready to risk it all? Maybe, Lon answered. Good. Let's talk as we're walking, and preferably when I'm eating too. So much to do. End of chapter. I'd quickly like to thank the T5 peeps, Cold War Boomerwaffen, Sevaren Serberous, Bushmaster 177, HenryTheRed, Casper Arnholtz, Cold War Boomerwaffen, Elijah Silvercross, Dragzoon W.R.E, and Sevaren Serberous. Thank you very much.